Hey everyone, great to be with you. Number 3 of our series, Word to the Wise. We're looking at the book of Proverbs, and if you've joined with us and tried to read your way through Proverbs, you'll see that it is it's broken up and it jumps about all over the place with lots of different topics. So one of the things that we've tried to do as we go through this series is collate some of the themes and some of the ideas and group them together. So as Ant was saying before, last week we had wisdom and words, because it's pretty much all wisdom. And this week our subject is wisdom and relationships. And we all need some help with our relationships. We all have relationships. It's one of those things that when we stop and think about it, it's actually essential for human flourishing. It's actually fundamental to our very existence, is our capacity to relate to one another. We are, and I think we've really been able to see this. We've had a strong sense of this as we've gone into lockdown, the sense in which we are so closely knit and sort of dependent on, kind of interdependent on each other. We have a need for community. We actually need community. It needs to function. We've got this need for affirmation. We want people to tell us that we're doing all right. We need people on the other side to challenge us. We want to belong. All of this kind of stuff. It's absolutely essential for our progress as human beings, to be able to have relationships with each other. And when we can't, things fall down, don't they? I've been trying to think about how these sort of come into being, and I think there's 3 main groups for us to think about in terms of how we have relationships with each other. I guess the first one would be inherited relationships, and we have. I mean, you could flip it, and you could sort of see the negative in it. There's the blood's thicker than water, and there's you can't change your family, but you can change your friends sort of scenario. There's people that we are in relationship with, and that's just the way it is. So there's inherited relationships. There's necessary relationships as well. If we're going to work, we've got to get on with our colleagues, or we encounter our colleagues. We've got people that live around us, neighbors. We might have classmates, that kind of thing. So we've got inherited relationships. We've got necessary relationships. And then I think we've got the relationships that we pursue. We've got relationships that we desire. So it's partners, friends, that kind of thing. And I guess there's the whole rest of the world that we might meet occasionally in different forms. But those 3 groups, I think, describe most of the relationships we'll encounter. And I think we journey through our lives working this stuff out. The journey of life is almost a sort of a lesson in how to do relationships. So I don't know, we used to do a mums and tots group, Xscape, when, in the days we used to meet together. And it was one of the first things I did when I came into ministry. Picked up the post. One of the first, actual things I had to engage was the mums and tots. And you think on the one hand that it's just this, I don't know, it's this one thing, but actually it's the start for the tots. It's the start for the human beings of this journey through life of needing to engage and relate to other people. So the mums and dads or the carers come along, and these small beings go from having all of their own toys and just having the parents, at their every whim, and then they're dumped in with about 50 other kids who all want the toys more than them. They might be a little bit bigger than them, and it's just for those that used to run the tot group, it's a chaotic delight. But what we're watching, what you're observing, is the story of humans working out how to relate to each other. And this sort of goes on right the way through life. You, as a parent now, I watch my kids and you see them sort of relate to different people. You see them pursuing certain, there's the popular, we need friendships, or I want relationships. Do I go after the really good looking person? Do I pursue that? Do I try and be friends with the popular people, or do I pursue people that are going to be really loyal? And you sort of working out, and the whole time, and you realize it's just essential that you can get on with somebody. And this sort of goes right the way through our lives. I'm 41 now, nearly 42, and wondering if this is ever something that we stop figuring out. and how we relate with each other is critical for us personally. But I think you look at the world around us and you see, I think one of the ways you would describe, you could pick pretty much any country you want, almost. It feels like that at the moment. And you'd say it's fractured. There's a fractured nature. We are very much grouped and struggling to relate to each other. It's critical, I think, for our world, that this idea that we're able to relate to each other. And the book of Proverbs that we're going to look at is here to make us wise. It's the book amongst a couple of other books in the Bible that is here to guide us in wisdom. We split the Bible up into, or we split the Bible up. The Bible is split up by scholars into different groups. And one of the groupings is the wisdom literature. And it's this idea that we will become wise for life. And we're thinking about being wise in relationships. Now, I think we probably keep reiterating this idea, but it's worth reiterating. Wisdom is not just information consumption. Wisdom is not just being able to recall something and store information. It's more than that, isn't it? Because to be wise for life, to be wise in relationships, we kind of know that it requires more than just being able to recall and know stuff, because life it's grey, isn't it? It's nuanced, it's complex, it's ever changing. We're constantly facing situations where the recall that we can have is not what's going to get us through. We need to think afresh about something. So it's more about being able to use our experience and the knowledge that we've got. That's what wisdom is. It's our capacity to use that, not just to be able to recall it, but be able to have a pattern and a structure for thinking stuff through, because life requires that. Proverbs doesn't teach wisdom. I think this is quite an interesting concept. It doesn't teach us wisdom by just giving us a line to recite. When I thought about the book of Proverbs, I think probably for most of my life, I've just had a couple of Proverbs that I've known, just that I've been able to regurgitate, a bit like Dot Cotton. I don't know if you watch EastEnders. I don't watch it. I've not watched it for a while, but there was a period in my life where it had appeal. Maybe I was just free at that time, but I used to watch EastEnders, and Dot Cotton was a character in it. I think she's still going, and she just fires out a verse every now and again. And I think sometimes we can look at, it's quite an easy thing to do, so sort of hang our hats on one or two key lines in the book and think that that's us being wise. I think that might even be unwise. I don't think that's what Proverbs is doing. I think what Proverbs does is give us a plethora of insight, life circumstances, and advice. It gives us a huge, big range of things to think about, not so that we just hang our hats on them all, but so that we have pathways and processes to function in the nuanced, complex lives that we live in. So there's nothing specific about, if you're a parent, whether your kids should date an 18-year-old person, or if there's nothing specific about there's no specific verse saying this is the age to encourage your elderly relative to think about going into a smaller house or into a care home or something like that. There's no specific guidance like that. But what there is, and tot up the amount of times, if you're reading through Proverbs with us, that it talks about this idea of pathways and processes. If we read it, we are trained in wisdom. Okay, so let's go through a few of these Proverbs that Dave read out to us, and let's see if we can be blessed or learn about some of the wisdoms that's in it. The first one there, pop up on your screen just now. Proverbs. So we've tried to group them together and to allow us to think about this a little bit more. Proverbs 13, 20, and 22, 24. Let me just read them again. Walk with the wise and become wise. Walk with the wise and become wise, for a companion of fools suffers harm. And 22, 24, and 25 says, Do not make friends with a hot-tempered person. Do not associate with one easily angered or you may learn their ways and get yourself ensnared. Don't make friends with a hot-tempered person. I don't know if you've got any hot-tempered friends. Don't associate with one easily angered, or you may learn their ways and get yourself ensnared. It asks us to think. So I think hopefully we're going to incrementally work our way through some of these concepts, and we're going to start with the more overt and obvious sayings about relationships. It talks about the influence. I think these proverbs give us insight into the influence that our relationships have. I looked for quotes on relationships, and the one that came up most frequently was one that said, "You are who your friends are." I think it was the most quoted by parents, that kind of idea. You are who your friends are. And the truth of it is, and I think this is where the wisdom that Solomon brings us is just a reflection of the realities of life, is that we rub off on each other. And we see probably a couple of times a week, if you're somebody that watches the news, you'll see a story probably about let's use the word a neutral person, somebody who has no inherent good or bad about them, just a young, often a younger person ends up in the wrong crowd, and often ends up, can end up, that's probably a better way to describe it, can end up in a gang, in with the wrong people, sometimes end up jailed, and sometimes ends up dead. You kind of know how that can happen. That can happen. Equally, same kid, same person, neutral person, no great good in them, no great bad in them, hangs around, with good peers. Maybe they've got a study group on a Wednesday night, or something like that, and life can head in a different direction, because friends have got this really, our relationships, the relationships that we choose, they have consequences. They have big influence on our lives. And I'm sure if we look back, we'll see that for ourselves. 27:4-5 and 27:9. Better. So at this point, I think what it asks us to do, we realize, as we go, as you keep reading through some of the Proverbs, you realized Paul used this word a couple of times in his preach last week, the ambiguity, sort of the nuance, the subtlety, and we're caused and stirred to think more deeply. So the first one that we just read there, some of the meaning was quite overt. It's not always the case. As you read through the Proverbs, you've got to stop and think, and then the wisdom, I think you accrue the wisdom as your brain's trying to work out what the message is. So it says, better an open rebuke than hidden love. Wounds from a friend can be trusted, but an enemy multiplies kisses. Wounds from a friend can be trusted, but an enemy multiplies kisses. And then the next one, perfume and incense bring joy to the heart, and pleasantness, and the pleasantness of a friend springs from their heartfelt advice. There is, I think, out of the wisdom of these two proverbs, we are told that there is a depth and a quality to real friendship. The more that we look into it, we sort of realize that real friends, and maybe you've experienced this is not, I don't think, some of the wisdom about our relationships here, it's not immediately obvious, and it's stuff that we learn over time. But I think if you've had friends for a while, one of the things you realize is that real friends are able to call you out. A real friend can call you out, even in a way that can hurt you. So I think, as this parable is suggesting, in a way that can hurt you, but because of the strength of the relationship, because it's got trust, that this wound, which is the language that Solomon uses, can be for your good. It can be a good thing. And flip that over, the other side, we know that it's possible to have somebody we might call there's the quirky inverted commas, we might call them a friend, and they might lavish praise on us all the time, but we know with wisdom that this person might not necessarily be a real friend. And I think that's the second thing that we see Proverbs do, just something for us to think about, is that Proverbs really illuminate this idea of wisdom. Paul, as Ant mentioned in his lead, Paul referenced Black Mirror, which is a show, I think it's a Netflix show that presents us, and I think the way that Paul talked about it was that it graphically grabs us with what might come of the way that we live our lives now. It's the black mirror, and he says Proverbs works in that kind of way. And I think one of the other ways that we can think about it is that it uses very, in a similar way to Black Mirror confronts us very graphically and visually with the consequences of how we might live our lives to grab us. Proverbs does exactly the same thing. It grabs us in as powerful a way, I guess, as anybody could grab anybody through the means of the day, in that he uses this poetry. So he uses the language, the kisses of an enemy. That's sort of and you're made to think of, that really cuts, doesn't it? We maybe even think of, if you've read the Bible a few times, you maybe even think of Judas, that sort of character, and you sort of grabbed by it. And he says in a positive way, sincere, heartfelt advice has got an aroma to it, and he sort of grabs us and illuminates the wisdom, and he makes us the writer really makes us think of the impact of our relationships. I think something that definitely something that I've been guilty of, and I think is a bit of one of those things that happens with us in our lives, is that we can become a little bit relationship blind, because I don't know, we might really want a friend. We might be the kind of person that needs affirmation, and then we'll just, in a search for that, in a need for that, we'll just grab hold of any friend that they can get. We might want to become popular. We might have a desire for a partner, and these sorts of things. And this is, I guess, on a personal level, but we can think about it more broadly as well. Our world can be a bit relationship blind in some senses. We don't see, just to use an example, just popping into my head, we don't see the person who's making the clothes, for example, as at the other side of the world, not getting paid very much. We don't always have that. We don't always see them. We don't always associate with them in a relationship sort of way. We don't think, oh, this is a fellow human being in that sense. We're not always just as aware of that. We can be a little bit relationship blind, and the Proverbs really grab us and say, you need to think about this. You need to think about this more. Have you considered this? Look how significant your relationships are. Look at the influence that they have on you. Look how much impact a friend can have on you. Look how important it is that you find genuine friendships and relationships. One more grouping of Proverbs. 17:17 says, and again, this is where it gets even more nuanced, and it gets particularly as we group these together, the meaning of them is less obvious and requires you to really sort of read into them and sort of dwell on them and think about them a little bit more. A friend loves at all times, and the brother is born for a time of adversity. 19:6 and 7 says, many curry favor with a ruler, and everyone is the friend of one who gives gifts. The poor are shunned by all their relatives. How much more their friends avoid them? Though the poor pursue them with pleading, they are nowhere to be found. And then 20 verse 6 says, many claim to have unfailing love, but a faithful person who can find. What is he saying about relationships? This is hard to, where do we start with this little passage? I think one of the things it says, as we sort of pull them together, just keep your eyes over them for a second. If we can keep that text up, it'd be really helpful. We kind of know that relationships, from the sort of collated wisdom of Proverbs, we know that the wisdom of Proverbs and just life, our own life, we know that relationships are critical. We know that they really impact us. We know that they're life shapers. And we know the importance of pursuing good relationships, having good friends and good partners and even good colleagues. We know the wisdom of that. But we also know, and I think this is what these particular groupings of Proverbs is saying to us, we also know, even with the best friends, even with awesome friends, even with the most tight-knit friendship groups, or the most solid marriages, or the best business relationships, people who you kind of love us through thick and thin. We see in verse in 1717 that all relationships can have holes in them. We kind of know that, don't we? And we see, I think the challenge of the middle proverb there is circumstances can come along that really can expose the kind of conditionality of just being a human. In that proverb, we see it. The poor can be shunned by all their relatives, and how much more their friends avoid them. We kind of know that when the circumstances of life can be against us, we can be exposed. Even though we want to be really good people, we know that we can be exposed. We know this personally, and I think we see it really graphically across our world. We see the relationship holes. We see the way that people are, racial tensions, or we see that there's, we see how tribal people can be. We see that the difference that class can make. We see the difference that personality types can make. I think the ultimate message, the sort of meta-narrative, the bigger picture message of Colossians, we're not in Colossians, of Proverbs, beams out of 20 and 6. I think many claim to have unfailing love. We feel this. We feel that we want the perfect relationship. We need the perfect relationships. But many claim to have unfailing love, but a faithful person who can find somebody who is perfect, that perfect relationship. And I think one of the things it gets us to think about is that all of our relationships, and it's really easy to look around the world and see the fractured world and go, yes, they definitely need some help in relating. But I think all of our relationships need redeeming. All of our relationships need some help, even the best ones. Now, if you've listened to me or Paul, or if you come to Christchurch for a while, at this kind of point in the sermon that we're going to talk to you about Jesus, because our preachers are not a lot different from Sunday school lessons, really. There's a great proverb that would point us there. It's 18:24. It says, "One who has unreliable friends comes to ruin." I think it's one of those proverbs that speaks out of Proverbs and gets us to think a bit more. Proverbs 18:24. "One who has unreliable friends comes to ruin, but there is a friend who sticks closer than a brother." Brother. Said that gangster now. Brother. Proverbs is a book in and of itself. It's a book, but it's part of the collected Bible story, and we've got to read it as part of that bigger picture. We've got to read it as a book that points to Jesus. One of the things that Jesus said, one of the things he asked us to consider. So at the end of Luke's gospel, we read about this. After his resurrection, one of the things he said was, all of these writings point to me. They make sense in me. They're all about me. They're all fulfilled in me. In the Gospels, we read that one greater than Solomon is to come, and that's Jesus. Paul says in the New Testament that Jesus is the very fulfillment and embodiment of wisdom. So just stop for a second. So I'm going to talk to you about Jesus, but one of the things that you should think, one of the things that might just be slowly popping into your head as it popped into mine, was Jesus doesn't seem to heed any of Solomon's advice. He doesn't seem to heed any of it. The wisest man, I think that's how he's often referred to, that has ever lived. And we've got these proverbs that I'm pointing you towards now and saying, this is wisdom. Jesus comes along, and it doesn't, his best friends are pretty random people. He hangs around with, tax collectors. He hangs around with prostitutes. He hangs around with people who are demon possessed. He doesn't. One of the encouragements in the last chapter of Proverbs, have a look at this. Proverbs 31 encourages, talks about a faithful wife and the idea of a beautiful wife. Jesus doesn't have a wife. He doesn't have a job. He doesn't observe doesn't seem to observe any of the wisdom that Solomon projects. What is Jesus doing? one of the statements that they would make about Jesus was that he was and we're going to sing it at the end, he was a friend of sinners. He had relationships that look on the face of it as incredibly unwise. What was he doing? I think we get a clue to the answer in John chapter 17. So would you read that with me? Because we should be a little bit stopped in our tracks. I think if Jesus is the fulfillment of wisdom, then what is he doing living this certain way? Here's a prayer that Jesus prayed. It's in the Passion Week, and if I'm really honest, I've struggled with this. I've wanted to share it a few times in the little prayer time that we have on a Friday morning, but not really knowing what to do with it. And it's really made sense to me this week as I've been thinking about this idea of relationships. John 17:20 says, "My prayer is not for them alone." I think that's referencing the disciples. "I pray also for those who will believe in me through their message." So listen to this, verse 21. "That all of them may be one. I pray that all of them may be one, Father, just as you are in me and I am in you." So this is the point where you start scratching your head a little bit. What's Jesus saying? "May they also be in us, so that the world may believe that you sent me. I have given them the glory that you gave me, that they may be one as we are one." Verse 23, "I in them and you in me, so that they may be brought to complete unity. Then the world will know that you sent me and have loved them even as you have loved me." So it'd be good just to keep that text up just for a second, because I think it speaks really powerfully into this question that we've got. What are we to make of Jesus? Here's what I'd say about Solomon's advice. It's amazing advice. It's wisdom. It's wide. It's wise. Solomon's guidance is wise, but it comes from a broken kingdom. It's advice that looks out and hopes for something perfect. It shoots for something perfect, but it's advice, sage, brilliant wisdom for the moment from a kingdom that's broken. Jesus's wisdom, his example, his guidance doesn't come from a kingdom that's broken. It comes from a kingdom that's perfect, that breaks into a world that's broken. That's how we should see it. That's what Jesus is doing. Jesus is saying in this little text, I have come here so that the relationships that people have with each other can be as they are supposed to be, as is perfect. That's what I'm doing. That's what my practice is. That's what I'm going around speaking about, reflecting, so that people can be as. So what he's talking about there, as he talks about, so I am in God as he is in me. When he talks about that stuff, what he's referencing is the Trinity, this perfect God existing in perfect community with himself. It's perfect. This perfect submission, this perfect respect, this perfect love, this perfect unity in that. And Jesus is saying, at the beginning of time, human beings were created to experience this. When we started out in Genesis, this is what humans could have pre-fall, pre-curse. This is the dream. This is the plan. I have come, Jesus says, to live a life that reflects that. So his wisdom breaks into this broken world that we live in right now. And so what he does as he lives, and maybe we'll talk about this a little bit in the chat, because some of it really jars, doesn't it? We see the wisdom of Jesus, and we see the wisdom that we think will keep us safe in today's world, and we reflect on what he's doing. And as he lives, when we think particularly about the fractured, broken world that we live in, and the difficult, our search for perfect relationships, and looking around the world, maybe even across the pond in America, at the sort of racial tensions, or looking at home as we see our sort of fragmented nation, and we think, we need to be able to relate. We need to be able to find a way to get past this. And we think about the way that Jesus brought people together. We think about we think about the story of the Good Samaritan, where Jesus speaks to a group of people who hate each other, and have got every reason to just hate each other and have got no common connection whatsoever. And Jesus tells a story that lasts. It lasted for 2,000 years. What I would say to you is it will last forever because it's wise. He tells a story of how, even though it seems impossible, these groups can come together. And what he does in telling, just for example, a story like that, he takes us on the best pathways, the best thought pathways. We think about the thought pathways that Solomon opens up for us, wisdom, but then we look again at what Jesus asks us to think about, and we see what's not just what's possible safe in this broken kingdom that we live in, but the place that we're ultimately headed to. We see him illuminating, as we think about how Solomon illuminated the wisdom of relationships, how he stirred us with his poetic thought, how he spoke evocatively and gets us to really think about what relationships are. When we look at Jesus and we see his life, a life that we see him go and speak to people that nobody would want to speak to. We see him share food, where we see him gather a group of disciples together from disparate parts of the world. We see him eating with sinners. We see him touching the sick and ill that nobody else would touch. We are moved. It's evocative. I guess we see ultimately on the cross, where he totally sacrifices himself that people would get true relationship and what it is. What Jesus is doing here, and he's doing it to us right now, I would say, and into the future, he's offering redemption for our relationships. It starts now. When we think about our relationships that are broken and fractured, it starts now as we are slowly melted by what we see in him. But a great hope is, when we think about the fractured relationships in the world and the fractured relationships that we have, perhaps the bits that we've got wrong in the past, the bits that we really regret, maybe about our marriages or about our friendships, that we'd want to go back and we think, we just can't change that. Our great story, our great hope is that Jesus is and has redeemed these, so that one day in eternity future, the relationships will be perfect. Jesus says to us in his life, this is love. This is what you're missing. This is the way. Really quick challenge. If there's something you're wrestling with, just consider the brokenness of the world and think about the wisdom Jesus offers. If this is something that you trust in and you want to go on with and pursue more, think about Jesus' statement when he says, "By this shall all men know that you are my disciples, that you love one another." Jesus says that our relationships with each other might be our most powerful witness. Might be our most powerful witness to the world. That should sort of rock us. If you're somebody who's going on for God and wanting to go on for God more, the way that we interact with each other, the way that we feel about each other, the way that we relate. And I guess maybe in this moment you think about people that you just can't get on with, or you won't talk to, or you've got huge problems with. Jesus says, "By this shall all men know that you are my disciples, that you love one another."
Excuse me there. I said ready a little bit too early. I was still having me drink my glass of water, but you must need a glass of water, Ash, after that. Thank you very much.
So I do always keep a glass of water, a coffee beforehand, followed with a glass of water. I have an unhealthy relationship with caffeine. I think there's nothing about that in the book of Proverbs, though, or at least not that I've seen. I don't know. You were telling me before that you've tried to read your way through it.
Yeah, recently, just in preparation for this, I sort of, like many, have probably dipped into, section by section over the years. But I actually found reading it from start to finish was pretty helpful, really, and pretty enlightening. There's a lot of repetition, isn't there? And yeah, so I guess I was going to ask you, when you come to approach something like this, and you've obviously grouped a few together, how do you pick? How do you pick which ones to start? There seems to be, to some extent, a bit of a scattergun of scriptures thrown in here. How do you group them together?
But it does, even when you've grouped them together, I think as I was just looking at them there, I thought it's still, even collating them, it still looks a little bit scattergun. The whole book is definitely, I mean, there's the odd chapter where things are, so chapter 31, I think chapter 8, where ideas are pulled together, and there's themes that run right the way through. But yeah, I think, I think anyway, one of the ideas is that you wrestle with this whole bunch of ideas. I think there's there's wisdom in every line. It's God's book, but I think there's a lot of wisdom in trying to not separate it out too much. And just one of the things when I referenced Dot Cotton, and somebody pointed out on the text that she's not in EastEnders anymore, but that's because I've not seen it for a while. But I think one of the things that we can do a bit of a Dot Cotton in that we sort of remember one and sort of base our lives on it, and then go, well, I don't feel much wiser for hanging on to this little thing. And I think I don't think wisdom works like that. I think Proverbs is a bit of a training ground that gives us some structure for thinking out stuff. So I try to use that word as often as I can: structure, pathways, processes. I think that's more what wisdom is, because I think that life is complex. Like there's nothing in there's a load of problems that you'll come up if you're a parent, or if you're a boss, or if you're an employee or an employer, or whatever you are in your relationships, where you'll look for the Bible and go, does it say anything about this? I can't see anything specific about this, but the Bible does, I think, give us a lot of sage advice.
No, great. Yeah, I loved how you described it as a plethora of insight, not any one to hang your hat on. I thought that was quite a helpful description. And actually,
go on, sorry.
I think a lot of what you said ties in a little bit with our previous series, thinking about the kingdom of God. Where, if you remember, we were thinking about how it's now but not yet.
Yeah.
How we handle this. This fact that we're coming here from a very broken set of relationships, and reading back about Solomon's life, all sorts of stuff going on, wisdom in that situation, and then we're seeing with Jesus, as you described, sort of out and about.
I remember using this as when I was about 17, 18, I think I would get advice from my parents saying, maybe it's not great to go there, or have you thought about this? All this sort of advice. And I would always say, well, Jesus went everywhere. And so that is, I guess, this kind of wrestling match where you go in, there's really, Solomon gives some sound advice, but I think anyway, that it's advice that comes with an acknowledgement that the world's, is quite broken. And there's wisdom in looking at, looking really hard at our relationships. But then Jesus comes and seems to, blow that advice out of the water. But he seems to do that, but he doesn't do that. He shows us sort of the end, the end goals, of wisdom, if you like. But I think it's hard to. It is something that it is a tension, I think, for us, because, and if you're somebody who needs to give advice, like you're a teacher or a parent, you want to say, look, you need to be careful with this. You need to really think about this. And you need to know that, doing this might get you into a bit of trouble. And yet you look at Jesus, who goes out of his way to, show love, has friendships with all kinds of people, so he can be a, powerful witness or an example. So it is, I think the wisdom maybe is you don't discard what Solomon says, but look at where he heads you, I think.
Okay.
Have you got any? One of my questions.
Sorry, no, I'm chairing this, Ash. You will answer my questions. No, I joke. So we're running short. We're running short on time. So I'm just gonna raise one more thing that I think we should both discuss, which is, in a real world scenario. We've talked about what a friendship is in different ways, but how do we be a friend to someone in the real here and now, bearing in mind that the relationship is not perfect, it's going to be broken, and we're hoping for something better, but nonetheless we still have to deal with people where they are. Should we just go in and rebuke people when they do something wrong? If we just read Proverbs, I think we might get that idea that we should go and call everyone out, as you say, all the time.
No, I mean, no, I don't think we should call everyone out all the time. I think we should look at Jesus and his example as hard as we can. That the encouragements in the New Testament to focus on Jesus, and you could read a bunch of the New Testament scriptures and say, it describes the rest of the match that we have as Christians, and then but focus on Jesus, because you're really going to need to keep your eye on him in this broken world. You're going to need to keep your eye on that, and I think head towards him. So no, I don't think. I think obviously there is time to call people out, but when you look at the way Jesus did call people out, for example, he managed to do it always soaked in love and grace, and with restoration in mind. So I think those are key things to think about. I think when you get the Solomon hat on and you think, oh, this needs some of, because it's so dangerous, isn't it? When you have the hat on of, I have got the wisdom here and I need to impart it on somebody else. It's so hard to do that in a humble, loving way. But I think Jesus gives us that example. So yeah, I think that, and I do think there is, particularly saying this as somebody who's got kids, I think there's inherent wisdom in, relationships are massively influential in our lives. And even as I say that, I hope that they have some Jesus impact on people when they grow up, in that they're brave enough and almost maybe foolish enough to make friends with everybody, and leave some of the example of Jesus in the people that they meet.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess Jesus is always as well. Just to finish, then he's pointing people to himself, isn't he? When he calls people out, and he's pointing them to the truth of the gospel and hope. And after all, I guess that's the only, we don't have wisdom that can heal, really. We can't really offer any truths that are going to make people's lives better. It's pointing them to Christ, I suppose. Ultimately, that's where we want to get to in terms of our relationships with people. Okay,
that would be the best.
Well, as you say,
the best pointer.
We've run out of time, but thank you ever so much for joining us. Enjoy the rest of your Sunday afternoon. Ash, you were going to say something?
No, I was going to say, could you close in prayer? And I was going to throw that at you.
Yeah, I was definitely going to say. And let's close in prayer, and then please, again, watch out for the email that's going to be coming out this week about what's going on at church. And we look forward to seeing you again soon in person, as soon as we can. So let's pray to close. Heavenly Father, we thank you for your word, the Bible. We thank you for the wisdom that it contains. And Lord, we confess that we recognize our relationships are far from perfect. And particularly, Lord, if we ask that you would help us to breathe light into the relationships that we have with each other. Mm. And Lord, we pray that we would truly long for the day in heaven when our relationships would be perfect with one another. And that we also pray that our relationship with you would be the source for that, and that you would draw us closer to you as we go away this week and we think about these things. And so we thank you for our time together, and we pray your blessing on our week to come. In Jesus' name, amen.
See you, everyone.
See you.